we have a funding opportunity available right now for level 2 chargers, and eligible locations include northern and eastern Maine, and as well as western Maine, 10 miles west of 295. But we're really targeting this region of Presque Isle and Aroostook County for level 2 chargers. That closes on June 8th. And I'll note that this isn't for residential chargers. This is for businesses, municipal lots, public sites that are likely to be convenient and strategically located for drivers coming in from over the border, and just look for the local community as EVs come in to the community. And we just closed an RFP for fast chargers. So we'll be awarding new locations around Lewiston, Auburn, Ellsworth, Bangor. And we're really excited about that. Those will be announced in the next month or so. And in addition, we have mail-in rebates for government entities and nonprofits who are looking to install level 2 chargers for their fleets. And you can find that information on our website. Next slide, please. And here's some quick financial examples to just show what a typical installation might look like in a location that you might find in your communities. The picture on the left is at Payson Park in Portland. And those are networked chargers. They're a little bit more expensive, but it allows the charger to connect to a cellular network where the drivers can see whether the chargers are being used, and the owner of the charger can collect payments for the electricity, which is kind of a prudent step if you're expecting a lot of use, and if you're the owner, you're looking to cover some of the operating costs of the chargers. And then the ones on the right were awarded for the Northern Maine Medical Center in Fort Kent. These are non-network chargers, so less expensive equipment. And we provided a grant of over $6,000 to cover the project cost for that. And I'll note that the installation costs are really the difference here, and it depends on how far away the chargers are from the electrical source and what amount of construction and excavation are needed. But we've seen projects much less expensive than this as well. It just depends on the specific site. Next slide, please. And then these are kind of our future plans using upcoming funding sources. We're hoping to add up to 60 new fast chargers throughout the state in the next 5 years, and up to 500 new level 2 plugs, with, again, the goal of really filling in gaps and building networks of chargers around communities to support EV adoption and to build confidence in drivers. And in addition, we do some research on residential smart charging behavior to kind of investigate what rates might help reduce the costs of charging at home during off-peak hours. Next slide, please. I think that might be the last one. And I'll give it away to Molly to talk about our rebates.
Great, thanks Anastasia, and thanks Jay, Galen, and all for having us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our electric vehicle rebate program, as well as just giving a sense of some of the vehicles that are in the Maine market right now and that folks are buying with these rebates, how they're working in Maine and how they can potentially fit into to our lifestyles here in Maine. So first, why drive electric? You may have heard some of these reasons before, but one of the main reasons people cite is fuel savings. You can save a lot of money by driving an electric vehicle. We estimate that you can save up to $650 a year in fuel savings by driving a battery electric vehicle. Of course, it depends on the miles that you drive per year and which vehicle you're switching from. But these were calculated using 11,500 miles driven per year and a gas price of $2.35 a gallon. So even at relatively low gas prices, electric vehicles save a ton on fuel. They also have lower maintenance costs because electric vehicles have very few moving parts compared to gasoline vehicles. And so there's just a lot less wear and tear on the system. They have quick acceleration and a quiet drive. People say that they're really fun to drive, and it's something that is sometimes surprising to customers. They're not expecting quite the peppiness and acceleration, but they're really fun. There's instant acceleration. It's quite different from a gasoline vehicle. So I'd really recommend trying it out. And then, of course, reduce CO2 emissions. So helping to lessen carbon footprints, improve air quality, and for municipalities, businesses, governmental entities, really helping to lead by example by being early adopters with these technologies. I also like to talk about how these vehicles are sufficient to serve most daily driving needs. So the average round trip commute in Maine is 24 miles. That's round trip. And 45% of Mainers commute less than 10 miles one way, 13% commute 50 miles or more. And the average range of battery electric vehicles on our list of eligible vehicles for the rebates is 233 miles. And some are much more than that, some are a little bit less than that. But that will just give you a sense of how far these vehicles can actually go in a single charge. The map on the right here, these circles represent a 50-mile radius from certain towns that I just selected up in Aroostook County. So Presque Isle, Holton, Caribou, and Fort Kent. So that's a 50-mile radius. So if you were to go, 50 miles out and 50 miles back, that's 100 miles of driving. And that's a very conservative estimate of, that's your electric vehicle gets much more range than that. But that's if you want to estimate conservatively and say, well, if I wanted to only use 100 miles of range, that's how far I can go. So that's just all to say that these vehicles are really sufficient for most people's daily driving needs. And unless you're regularly doing long road trips, going down to Portland, going to Boston, these vehicles are really sufficient. And the more you drive them every day, the more you can save, the more fuel savings you will see. So they are high mileage vehicles. All right. Now our rebate program. I'm guessing that there are folks on this call who represent businesses, maybe some represent nonprofits. Our standard rebate for individuals, businesses, and nonprofits is $2,000 for a battery electric vehicle and $1,000 for a plug-in hybrid. We also have enhanced rebates for low-income residents. So that's anyone that is on the list to receive heating assistance, also known as HEAP or LIHEAP in Maine. We also offer enhanced rebates for governmental entities. So those are municipalities, school districts, and certain other governmental entities in Maine. And select nonprofits. So these are nonprofits that are listed in the 211 Maine directory of service providers and are also 501c3 organizations. So these are like community action agencies, soup kitchens, organizations that serve the most vulnerable populations in Maine, and they can receive an enhanced rebate. So how our rebate program works is it's an instant rebate at the dealership. So we have a network of participating dealers throughout the state. I think we have about 65 right now. A few of them are up in the county. We're getting more and more up in northern Maine as the program grows. And we're adding new dealers all the time. And they sign on to offer eligible vehicles and to help customers through this program. And then they offer those rebates as an instant point of sale discount. So it's really easy for the customer. All they have to do is show up and they'll be shopping for an eligible vehicle, and the dealer will take that price right off the purchase or lease price. This also works for leases. They'll use that to lower your monthly payment. All right, I just wanted to show an illustration of what a purchase price could look like with our incentives. And then I also want to show some of the other incentives that are available for electric vehicles, because it's not just our rebate. There's also a federal tax credit, which can be up to $7,500. It could be a little bit less if the battery size of the vehicle is smaller. So for instance, the Prius Prime, which is a plug-in hybrid, has a maximum credit of $4,502 because it has a smaller battery. And the tax credit is also limited by your tax liability. So it's important to note if you don't make enough to owe over $7,500 in taxes, you're only going to be able to claim the amount of credit that you're liable for taxes. Also, manufacturers offer some pretty substantial discounts, often on electric vehicles. I just put in $3,000 here, but we often see factory discounts of much more than that. So it's always worth asking your dealer what the current deals are for particular models and for particular brands. I also wanted to show for low-income customers, as I mentioned, we have an enhanced rebate, and we also offer rebates on used vehicles, used electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. And there are a number of them out there. There are not a ton out there yet because they're a new technology, but we're seeing more and more hit the market every day. So there can be some pretty good deals on used vehicles for low-income customers. They have to be model year 2015 or newer, and they still have to be purchased from a participating dealer. There's no private sales. And those folks will just apply for pre-approval through our website prior to purchasing the vehicle, and that will let the dealer know that they're eligible for a higher rebate. And just quickly, because there's probably some municipal folks on here, like low-income customers, if you're applying for an enhanced rebate as a governmental entity, you'll want to apply for pre-approval through our website. We'll send you a letter that says you're eligible, and you'll take that right to the dealer, and they'll give you that increased rebate. We also have a mail-in rebate for governmental entities, tribal governments, and those select nonprofits that receive a rebate on an EV. So if your town purchases, for instance, 2 electric vehicles, you can get 2 mail-in rebates on chargers to go along with those vehicles. And it's up to $500 per charger. All right, so if you go to our website, you can find more information about our rebates. You can also find our eligible vehicles list. We have, I think, 24 eligible vehicles right now, plug-in hybrids and BEVs. This is just a small sampling of what's on that list, but there are many more up there. And I would encourage you to go and check out, compare and contrast. There are vehicles for all tastes and driving styles. There are SUVs, hatchbacks, sedans. There's a plug-in hybrid minivan. So there is quite a wide variety. It's not just Tesla. It's not just the old Nissan Leaf. There's a growing number of models out there. And on this list, you can compare the fuel economy. You can see the battery size and how long it will take to charge each of these vehicles. So you can start to get a sense of what's out there in the market. And then I just wanted to run through a few specific models to really give more of a sense of what's out there. So the Chrysler Pacifica is a plug-in hybrid. It's the minivan I was talking about, 32 miles of electric range. The great thing about plug-in hybrids is, depending on your driving needs, you can be driving it as a fully electric vehicle most of the time. If you're only doing shorter trips, 30 miles or less, you could be driving this vehicle without using gas most of the time. And it depends on the vehicle. Some of them have shorter range. Ford Fusion, I actually think they just stopped making this car, but it has a shorter electric range. But that's still quite a bit, 26 miles. If you're not driving long distances on a regular basis, it can still get you pretty far on electricity alone, which is awesome. Kia Niro is another plug-in hybrid. It also comes as a battery electric vehicle. This is more of a small SUV crossover type car, but has plenty of space and also has 26 miles of electric range. And then onto the BEVs, the Hyundai Ioniq BEV is, I think, the cheapest fully electric car out there. It only has 124 or 170 miles of range, but if you think about the map that I showed you earlier, that can be more than enough for your daily driving needs if you're not driving across the state on a regular basis. And really excellent fuel economy and no gas. The Hyundai Kona is another popular car. It's a BEV. It's more of an SUV. And it has 258 miles of electric range. So that's getting up to the higher range. We find that people are saying that 300 miles is kind of the sweet spot where that's what most folks want. And these vehicles are starting to hit up against the 300 miles of range. But people have these 250-mile cars and they do just fine in rural areas. And then a couple of the upcoming models that we're excited about. Of course, the pickup trucks are coming later this year and early next year. The Ford F-150 electric, as well as the Rivian. Ford is releasing an electric version of the transit van, the e-transit, that is expected later this year. And it's supposed to have about a $45,000 price point. So that is going to be one of the more affordable fully electric vans on the market. And then also some more plug-in hybrids are coming. So just a lot more diversity and diversifying into different vehicle types. Just wanted to talk a little bit about what we do to let consumers know about this technology and the fact that EVs do work in Maine and that they are on the roads right now. We have not been doing test drive events, but we plan to resume them once it becomes safe to do so again. So that's bringing vehicles out there and letting people get in the driver's seat and really try them out. We know that the biggest factor that will influence people to trying these vehicles out is to actually get behind the wheel and test drive them. So that's a really important part of our program. We also have radio ads and Google ads. We are working on building out extensive resources on EV ownership and charging. We have quite a bit of information on our website right now, and we're building that out all the time. And we do surveys of our customers who have already received rebates to know how they feel about their vehicles and what their experience has been. This is just a snapshot of what's on our website. You can find a vehicle cost calculator that will help you compare the cost difference between different models of vehicle, electric as well as gas and plug-in hybrids. So that's pretty fun to play with if you're thinking about switching to an EV. You can locate public charging stations. We have information about the different types of chargers, as well as vendors and suppliers that you can contact to purchase charging equipment from, and as well as to help you install it, and much more. So that's our website, efficiencymaine.com/EV. I'm going to skip over these web resources because I think we're running out of time, but you can find all of this on our website. And then if you have any questions after this presentation, feel free to call Efficiency Maine. You can reach a real person that will answer your questions, and you can also email us info@efficiencymaine.com. Thanks so much.
Is there any way we can get this video sent to our email so I could share it with my partners?
You're muted.
I'm sorry. Yes, I am recording this, and we should be able to get that out to everybody that wants a copy in the next day or so, I believe.
That'd be great. Thank you.
I've got a couple questions.
Absolutely.
You said that your goal is to get 219,000 EVs by 2030. I don't know if you know this, but the fleet in Maine is about 410,000 vehicles. So that would be replacing over half of Maine's fleet of vehicles. Do you think that's likely or probable, or even doable at this point?
Well, I'll just jump in and clarify that it's not Efficiency Maine's independent goal. It's a statewide, and we recognize that we're not going to be able to achieve that just with our incentives. That's kind of what the Maine Climate Council determined is necessary to reach those greenhouse gas reduction goals. So it's certainly ambitious, but EVs are anticipated to reach price parity around in the next few years, and around 2025. And several of the big manufacturers, as you probably know, are committing to net zero fleets in the next 10 to 15 years. So we're hopeful, but it's going to be a big lift for sure.
Yeah, just for those watching, there's about 1,400 new vehicles sold in Aroostook County every year, from my reports. But I have one more question. I know there was a big focus from the state level on the 395 corridor, getting folks from Boston, Massachusetts, and then over to Bar Harbor. Is there going to be a focus for a public charging infrastructure from Bangor North? As I understand it, there's only the nearest level 3 charger for the universal plug is in Augusta. Is there any plans to build anything north of Augusta for those without a Tesla?
Yes, definitely. So like I mentioned, the fast charger funding opportunity that just closed includes possible locations in Bangor and Newport, and Ellsworth is kind of the farthest north along the coast. And we only have enough funding for this round to kind of cap it at those locations. And then our goal in the future is to kind of reach farther north and to fill in those gaps. Definitely.
Great. Okay. That's all I had.
Chris, and I don't want to take Anastasia or Molly's thunder, but I think one of the reasons that Galen and I really put this together was to try to educate, businesses and municipalities, what's out there for funding, for technical assistance, maybe what's coming down the road from a vehicle standpoint. And the hope is really to increase, charging and charging stations throughout our region. And, that's our hope. I mean, obviously we can't force, but that's where and Galen and I thought we would be going. So.
Very well.
Yep. Any other questions?
I do have
a question.
If you don't mind.
Yep. Mr. Klein, go ahead.
I'm kind of wondering about the cart and the horse here as far as creating enough infrastructure to have electric vehicles become more than simply an interesting sideline here in Aroostook County. What needs to come first? Does the structure need to come first so we can get cars up here? Do we need to get cars up here in order to see enough of an incentive to get the infrastructure for charging going? So for example, like I have some parking space at our location that we could probably convert to a couple of charging stations. But what's the likelihood that we would be able to then turn that around into something that's worth supporting and not just be a hobby for us to put money into?
Molly, do you want to take a first stab?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Anastasia can chime in on this as well, but I think there's multiple factors at play here. One is that eventually, and you'll hear more about this probably later, but when the border does open back up again, Quebec has one of the highest rates of EV ownership in the country, and other provinces in Canada are also pretty high up there too. So there is a pretty good chance that, especially in a place that gets a lot of through traffic from tourism, that these stations will be used. But just in answer to your question about the chicken or the egg, I think it's both, and that's Efficiency Main's tactic, is to not do one without the other. That's why we have a robust rebate program as well as the charging station program. And we, Aroostook County is a real important area for us, of course, which is why we're really excited to be on this call. But we would love to do whatever we can to support the consumer education that needs to happen in order to get more folks interested in these vehicles, as well as working with dealers to make sure that they have all the supports that they need to be able to make these viable. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in and kind of reiterate the benefits of going with a networked charger, despite the more expensive installation of the equipment. It's not incumbent on the host of the charger to provide free electricity for all drivers, and the model is shifting towards collecting payments to kind of try to build that culture that's similar to what gas-powered vehicles are used to, and it shouldn't be kind of a money drain on your decision, to host a charger. It's not a public amenity. It's something that chargers or drivers will pay for to use as a service, and all of these things that Molly's talking about kind of have to happen simultaneously, I think, to build confidence in the technology and to kind of demonstrate that it can work in regions like Aroostook County.
Okay, thank you. I just want to finish with this. So if I email Efficiency Maine, has anybody collected resources that kind of give us some projections on how much we need to have here in the area to really make this a viable, ongoing, self-sustaining structure?
There are some resources out there that kind of give you estimates, so we can point you to those resources.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Dennis Parody had a question, and then we had one in the chat room, and I think we probably would have to move on after that.
Yeah, my question's been answered. It was basically on how we're gonna charge for this. If people from Quebec came into the grocery store parking lot and they parked, will there be a coin op system, a credit card system that would pay for this? So that could get quite costly, I guess you would say.
Right. A lot of the chargers these days have software that connects to people's phones. So there are apps that not only help you find the chargers along your route, but you can start the charging session right through that app on your phone. And many of them have sort of subscription plans. So you'll pay X number of dollars per month to be able to access chargers kind of in those networks. And then that money will go to the owner of the chargers to cover those operating costs. And as the owner, you would have the freedom to set those fees to whatever you like, whatever is necessary to cover those costs. Many of them also have credit card swiping systems or toll-free numbers where the drivers can call and pay by phone. So there are a lot of options out there. And if you search on plugshare.com, that's a great way to kind of get a feel for what's on the ground now in Maine and what people are charging for sessions per minute and per kilowatt hour. It kind of varies. I hope that helps.
Jay, maybe quickly I can chime in there. So this is Michael Pizzaferi. I'm from the Quebec Government Office in Boston. It's really nice to be with you all tonight. And just to your point about if a Quebec driver, which there are many of them, comes over, one of the conversations that we've been having with the folks at Efficiency Maine, at Maine Dot, and with the governor's administration as well, is to ensure that that back-end software can communicate with each other, so that if somebody does already have the app that Anastasia just mentioned on their phone because they're charging their car regularly in Quebec or in New Brunswick, that when they show up in Maine, they can find a place to go. They have a place to pay. They're not going to run into some sort of challenge trying to pay for the electricity to charge their car because of credit card fees or anything like that. So that is part of the ongoing conversation between our two jurisdictions as well, and something that we hope will eventually be harmonized across the full region, so that you could get in your car from Aroostook County, go to Cape Breton Island and across to Western Quebec, and never have to worry about interoperability of the charging payment system itself.
Well, thank you. I think that actually segues, as Galen said in the chat, pretty well into our next segment. And I'll turn it over to Galen.
All right. I think we have Gordon back next. Jay, if you want to introduce him with chargers.
What did we want Gordon to go next? Okay. Yep. I'm sorry. Yes, actually it does segue right into our next segment. Gordon Beck is project director for a Climate to Thrive, managing the EV charging infrastructure programs there. Climate to Thrive has been funding public EV charging stations in eastern and northern Maine for 3 years, with over 30 plugs installed from Belfast to Lebec to Holton. And there's more on the way. Climate to Thrive focuses on level 2 public chargers for municipalities, nonprofits, and businesses offering public access. And I know for a fact, and I don't want to step on his toes, that he also offers technical assistance of what may actually be needed. And I know he's going to be talking about that. Gordon moved to Mount Desert Island full-time in 2009. He has been working with the Climate to Thrive as well as the town of Mount Desert Sustainability Committee for a number of years on a variety of sustainability projects. He drives a Hyundai Kanoa. So with that, I will open it up to Gordon.
Thank you, Jay, and thanks for having me on this. And a brief word about, what is my group, A Climate to Thrive. We are a community-based nonprofit that started just with some residents on Mount Desert Island with the mission of trying to seek energy independence for the island of Mount Desert by 2030, which is a pretty ambitious goal, but it encompasses a variety of sustainability initiatives, including solar and EVs, and specifically EV charging infrastructure. We were fortunate in 2018 to receive a foundation grant, and the purpose of the grant was to implement public EV chargers throughout these 4 counties in northern eastern Maine and down east Maine, with the idea of bringing public charging stations out there, getting that infrastructure out there to help alleviate range anxiety. If people were thinking about acquiring an EV, the more charging stations that were out there in public, the less range anxiety, and also to encourage tourists and visitors from out of state and from Quebec to be able to come into Maine and know there were places to charge. So we've been doing that. We're actually over something on the order of 35 connectors installed, and there's another about 15 in the queue just for this first half of 2021. These are all level 2 chargers. They're public chargers, and we don't have the resources from the VW settlement funds, but in the sense we are kind of a smaller entity supporting many of the same initiatives that Efficiency Maine is doing, and we've worked with a variety of municipalities. All the stations that we've implemented are available to be located on PlugShare, so EV drivers, whether they're residents or visitors, they look on PlugShare, and many of those chargers are ours or ones that we've installed. The focus, as I say, has been down east to bring these out into rural areas and to encourage residents to begin to think about getting EVs. And obviously the Efficiency Maine programs are really great, because if somebody starts to get interested and they go, okay, well, charging maybe is not a big hindrance, the rebates that are out there and the incentives provided by Efficiency Maine are really helping, as well as the enormous number of plugs that they are installing out there. I would just want to make a couple of notes. Well, first of all, I put in the chat room our website and my contact info. We're happy to help municipalities, nonprofits, businesses who are thinking about putting in chargers and offer our experience in a variety of different areas, and we continue to do that throughout the region. We've worked with the expensive chargers, network chargers, and we've worked with the very basic, less expensive chargers. We found in the last couple of years, most of the chargers that we've installed for towns and municipalities have been basic chargers. There are amenities that are being offered to visitors. And as I think Anastasia or Molly noted earlier, the trend is now towards networked chargers, or ones where the EV driver pays for the use of the charger. So the town is not on the hook for all of that electricity cost. Having said that, we do have, you know, a number of municipalities that are paying for that electricity, and they're offering it as an amenity to draw people to their downtown areas. I can give you a couple of examples. One is, you know, Ellsworth, which we put in chargers, I think 3 years ago now, and they're free to the public, and they're right downtown, and they're really a good sort of little destination amenity. And if somebody's going to spend an hour or two, they're going to put money into the town. Machias's Chamber of Commerce has a great quote that we didn't ask for. They just sort of came out with it. We put in a couple of chargers in the Water Street parking area by the river in Machias. The Chamber of Commerce got a letter from some visitors who said, "We're so happy you have an EV charger here in Machias. It gave us a reason to stop and spend a couple of hours and discover this town, and we'll definitely be back." And the Chamber of Commerce said, you know, that couple stopped in and they probably dropped more money in the town than our whole electric bill for those chargers for the year. Now that'll probably change. The more use there is, the more the cost goes up. So the trend is towards the model which has the user pay for the use of the charger. And you know, we're working with a variety of networks. We've found some, you know, less expensive options. But this is all moving. Sort of one comment to the chicken and egg situation is that the cars are here and they're coming, and the manufacturers are just rolling them out more and more. And out-of-state people are, you know, just overwhelmingly beginning to see that they can drive here from pretty much anywhere, and they know there are places to charge up. And so it's really, it's a really good thing in our view to have a municipality or a destination, in that this can, obviously hotels are pretty obvious, restaurants, etc. You know, to offer this out there. And, you know, drivers are becoming more and more sophisticated, so they recognize the need to, that they will be paying, etc. And it's good to hear that there is a lot of talk between jurisdictions and networks, and there are roaming agreements that are becoming more and more common, so that it doesn't matter what account you set up with ChargePoint, for example, or Flow in Quebec. Those two are interoperable, and I think that will be a trend that continues. You know, having cars here, I think it was really telling the use of cars and the mileage driven. A lot of people have a couple of cars, and there's one that you're going to take on really long road trips, and there's others that, you know, you may have a beater that you use for around town and short distance and daily small, you know, shorter commutes. And EVs are perfect for the latter. It's for all the right reasons, as enumerated earlier. And, you know, right now, long distance driving, it may not be the best choice, but it really appears that will change in a couple of years. And once you start seeing some of these pickup trucks that are coming out, they're phenomenal. And I think they're going to make a big difference once people get a chance to drive them. Range and winter and all the other aspects. I mean, I've had my EV for a couple of years. It was rated, this the Hyundai Kona. The EPA says it's got 258 miles of range. In probably 3/4 of the year, I'm much closer to 300 miles of range. In the winter, it drops a bit. If I use the heat a lot, you know, yeah, there is some range loss, but you adjust to it just like you would with a gas or diesel car in many ways. Most of the charging that's done by EV owners is done at home. I think the figure is something like 80–90%. All charging is done at your residence overnight. So it's not as if there's no public charger in a place you're going and you've got, you know, plenty of range because you're leaving the house with a full battery. It's really much less of an issue than people have made it out in the past. And obviously the more chargers, you can get to a destination knowing you can charge up and get home, no problem. Anyway, what we offer, in a sense, especially in Aroostook County, is support for those efficiency main incentives. If you're going to put in a couple of chargers, Efficiency Maine awards you a grant, and the bulk of that installation is covered. We're here to try and help make up the rest of that. And that's really what our goal is to get as many EV chargers out there as possible and coordinate with some other organizations as well. We hope to have similar to, the test drive, hands-on experience. Later this fall, we're going to try to do an event in Bangor. We tried to do it last year, but obviously, pandemic quashed that. But hopefully, towards the end of the summer or early fall, we hope to have a couple of the dealers in Bangor with new models, plus a variety of private owners, and a full range of different types of EVs for people to really get a sense of what they can do. One other thing I will mention is somebody had mentioned, I think, there's Tesla, and yes, Tesla is a proprietary network of chargers, so that if you have a Tesla, you're in great shape. If you don't have a Tesla, you can't use their chargers. The company Rivian, who is producing a pickup truck and a SUV, the pickup truck should be out in another month or two, and start to see a few of those on the road. Rivian, the company, is also planning to put in a network throughout the country. They call it their adventure network because they're, really sort of geared towards off-road and adventure stuff in national parks, state parks. We're beginning to talk to them and see what their plans are for Maine, but that'll be another sort of wave of chargers, both DC fast chargers and level 2 chargers that'll be coming to the state as well. And again, I put my contact stuff in the chat room, and if anybody has questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you, Gordon, for the presentation. Just for the audience, Gordon, in your experience with helping other municipalities and other areas, has there been any common pitfalls that have come upon folks when they try to put these chargers in? Do you know?
No common pitfall. Frankly, most of the chargers that are out there these days are very robust. They hold up well, so people's concern about maintenance. We've had very few incidents of where there've been issues with chargers. Most of them are, it's a bad circuit breaker or something, and it's an easy fix, or it's power cycling the breakers to get the chargers back up and running. If you're planning to put a charger in, the equipment, the costs are pretty straightforward and well known, and the options of whether to offer a basic charger and pay for the electricity, or go with the network charger, that's a pretty straightforward decision. You need to make sure there is power relatively nearby. As you could see in some of the earlier examples of installations, it is the make ready, the installation cost. Do you have 240 volt power nearby and enough amperage to support a charger too? And what that distance is? Do you need to do trenching, etc.? And every site is a little different, but it's a lot easier than people think, and it doesn't take necessarily any specialists to do the installations. We've worked, and the municipalities have worked with, variety of local electric contractors in their areas. It's hooking up an appliance is what it comes down to.
What is the, average cost of an installation in a charger?
Well, my answer would be every site's a little different.
Yeah.
The equipment, a basic charger runs basically $700 for a single level 2 plug that's putting out full normal level 2 power. There are some cheaper ones out there, but what we recommend is a fully ruggedized version of whatever charger you like. We've had good success with a company called Clipper Creek. They run $700. We've done some very inexpensive installations where there's plenty of room in an existing building's breaker panel. I think probably, for example, Eastport City Hall, they just ran a little conduit from the breaker to an exterior wall, mounted the charger on the exterior wall, boom. Very inexpensive when it comes down to it. And one other comment I would make is that all the installations we've done and implemented, we always recommend putting 2 chargers in for 2 parking slots. It's fine. There are plenty of instances out there where there's just a single charger, but we kind of like the idea that there are 2 there. And in many of the higher use areas, there are going to be more. You kind of want to think about expansion for down the road, and there are any number of examples of where that's. Belfast was the very first installation we executed in a downtown parking lot. Took 2 parking slots. It's very heavily used, and Belfast is they're going to be putting in a lot more chargers. It'll be a little slower in some of the smaller, more rural areas, but it's sort of good to think ahead. If you're running conduit to a parking area with a couple of slots, think about running conduit to the next 2 over, because within a year or 2, there will likely be more demand. There's just, it's the tsunami of EVs. They are coming, and they're coming to Maine. They already are in Maine.
Any other questions?
I do have one.
Not sure who that is, but you're breaking up. Technology. We didn't get whoever that was speaking. I apologize. You.
Anything other than Tesla chargers? I have a level 2 charger.
I apologize, whoever that was. If you want to type something into the chat room, we can certainly try to answer your question, and we'll go from there.
There is one question in the chat from John Keene. The actual current draw at the breaker for a high power charger, if you mean a level 2 charger, the current draw is usually 32 amps or less. But the sort of the norm out there is to have a 40 amp breaker that's going to draw 32 amps per connector. And there are higher amperage chargers out there that we will see down the road, more of those, presumably, as the car batteries themselves have higher acceptance rates.
Yeah, I'll just chime in there quickly. We typically require at least 32 amps for a level 2 charger. And as Gordon mentioned, as vehicles, some of the newer vehicles like the Ford Mustang and the VW ID4 are able to take higher current, higher amperage, and so they can charge faster. So it can be a good idea to think a little bit higher than what most of the vehicles on the roads now currently need. So thinking about 40 or 50 amp is not a bad idea.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed that question, John. I don't see any other questions. I think we can turn that over to Galen to introduce our next speakers.
Absolutely. So our next speaker is Chris Carroll. He is the manager of Carroll's Auto Sales, a new dealership in Presque Isle. He is a Maine business graduate. He has a diverse background and experience in entertainment, media production, and the automotive industries. As 24 years old, Chris has established himself as a local authority on electric vehicles in the auto sales space. In the automotive industry, he is committed to staying at the forefront of emerging technologies and finding how the Aroostook industry will meet customers' demands in the future. And as a side note, Chris was one of the first folks to bring EV technology to my attention, and one of our first dealers, and said, "Hey, we'd like your level 2 charger down at the pavilion. I'd like to, really get involved in how we can bring this more to Aroostook County of this technology." So I'm very happy to pleased to introduce Chris to the panel.
All right, Galen, thank you. I don't know if I could have been introduced any better. Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm going to try and liven things up here a little bit. So for those of you that are in front of your computers, meander over onto the bottom there. There's a reactions tab, and I want everyone to give a thumbs up right now. Does everyone see where you can do that? There we go. There's some thumbs up. Don't be afraid to give some feedback throughout my talk, okay? Normally when I give a presentation, I like to start with a joke, so I'll start with 2. We're all on a Zoom call. Hey, all of us could not be wearing pants right now. It's fine. It's perfectly acceptable, right? And my second one is, I've got a slideshow. It's not too long. I'll try and get through it in the time. Actually, I am going to start myself a timer right now because I have a tendency to talk a lot longer than I want to. And this slideshow is brought to you by last night about 3 Red Bulls and an all-nighter. So we'll see how it goes. I just want to go back to address something. Let me share my screen real quick. Let's see here. Can everyone see that? There was a question earlier about how fast vehicles could take a charge. If you look, there's some great data. This is the charger I put in at the dealership. It's a level 2 charger. We ended up putting it on a 50 amp, I believe. We took the upgraded version of this. And these are all the different times. So the vehicles are regulated by 1, the power output of your charger, and 2, that AC power is actually converted to direct current and then sent to the batteries. So this is a great graph. You'll see kind of some of the charging times here for the different levels, battery capacities, et cetera, et cetera. And this information is readily available on the internet, the World Wide Web. So let's go into my presentation if I can figure out how to share this here. All right, share, and then we go to file. How do we do this? View. How do I start the presentation? No, I don't want to do that. Hold on, let me stop share. Let me start this first. Probably should have practiced this, huh? Design, slideshow. Haha, there we go. All right. Can everyone see that? No, probably not. Let's go here and share. All right, how about that? I can't see you guys nodding, but I can see my presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and take that as we can all see things on here. So, all right, the industry outlook and perspective regarding the EV market. I want you to ask yourself a question. When was the electric vehicle invented? Well, it was actually invented in 1887 in the United States. That's a picture of it right there. It was William Morrison's electric carriage. It could carry 12 passengers, and the batteries were in the seats of the bench. It had a range of 35 to 50 miles, and it cost $3,000. Now, this is back in 1887, mind you. This is when most people didn't have electricity to their homes. So $3,600 was a good sum of money. This is just another electric vehicle that came about the same time in Europe. William Morrison, the previous gentleman here, he believed he had the first electric vehicle. He actually challenged people in the papers. He said, I'll give you $5,000 if you can prove to me one was invented somewhere else before mine. pretty neat. He never did have to pay out the $5,000. So I think it's pretty safe to say that's the first electric vehicle. You're looking at it right there. This is about the same time the gas automobile came about. And this is actually the Porsche P1. This was invented in 1898, some 10 years later. And it could do 22 miles an hour. So why were electric vehicles invented back in the 1800s? For much of the same reason that we're seeing them now. They're quiet, they're efficient, they don't have to use any fuel, which in some cases back in that time was somewhat hard to come by. But also these primitive engines were very loud. The gas engines were very loud, very smelly, very gross. You didn't want to ride a horseless carriage because of the vibrations and things like that. So they made them electric. In 1900, the year 1900, actually 1/3 of the automobiles on the road were electric. Think about that for a second. We don't see numbers like that today. We haven't seen it. We won't see anything close to that for a very long time. Back in the 1900s, that was the case. And they were rechargeable. They weren't one-off spectacles. Now, why did we see them end? Well, it was because the Model T was introduced in 1908. And that mass production just drove the cost down. $650 for a Model T versus $1,750 for the early electric vehicles. And we did see that kind of coincide with the proliferation of the electricity in the home. But in the end, the internal combustion engine, the ICE, won out. So this is a picture I want you to look at. And this is a really important picture because it signifies where we are in our EV adoption, and that for a long time, almost 30 to 40 years, back in the early 1890s, 1880s, and early 1900s, this was not an uncommon sight to see a carriage and an automobile side by side on the same road. And now I want to pause because I want you to think about that. This is where we are. We're seeing these electric vehicles kind of come about, but the mainstream adoption of them is really far off. When the automobile first came out, most people couldn't afford them. They were too expensive. It took a very long time for it to become affordable and widespread as it is now. So let's do some math. We talk about the rapid adoption of EVs, but really how rapid do we expect it to be? Well, it's not going to happen as fast as everyone would like to think. And I really want to kind of drive this point home with my presentation tonight. So there's currently 284 million registered vehicles in the United States. There's about 17, 18 million sold each year. This is light duty vehicles like you'd see on the road. Okay, 284 divided by 17. If we flipped a switch today, or let's say next year, January 1st, 2022, it still takes 16 years to replace the entire fleet in the United States. That's 100% EVs, 16 years. Now that's not going to happen anytime soon. And you know, I'm a realist. You look at these numbers, they tell kind of a different story. I know the efficiency girls touched on this. We have 3 types of electric vehicles, but typically when we talk about electric vehicle, and the thing I want to talk about tonight is the one that's highlighted. It's the battery electric vehicle, okay? So it's purely powered by batteries. Okay, so when you think of an electric vehicle, what do we all think of? Tesla, right? We hear Tesla in and out all day. We hear about Tesla. So I want to talk about some of Tesla's production numbers because they're actually quite surprising. We look at Tesla as kind of a leader in the market. They were one of the first ones to make a commercially available electric vehicle. So they founded the Tesla, I believe it was the Model S back in 2015, as you can see on my graph here, okay? Each year, Tesla only produces around 100,000 vehicles, and that was at the start of it. But for we're going to go back to that in a second. But let's just look at this graph. These are electric vehicles that are being introduced to the market today. You can see Jaguar came out with one, a couple of luxury brands in 19 and 20, and then in 21 we have a lot coming on market. In 22 we have the new Cadillac. Some of the highlighted major entrants are the Rivian, the RT1 or the R1T. It's expected June of this year, 300-mile range. Base price, $75,000. The R1S, which is the SUV type, same thing, 300, 400 mile range, SUV, 70 grand. Lucid Motors, expected Q3 of this year, 500 mile range, $77,000. And you're probably thinking to yourself, there's a common theme here. Endurance pickup, expected 2021. It's a 250 mile range and 100,000 pre-orders. Typically in the space we imagine now, most electric vehicles are out of the cost of the average consumer. You know, you look at these prices, $77,000, $75,000, $70,000. And I've got some numbers here. For a Tesla Model S, the base price is $81,000. A Model X, $91,000. The Model Y, $52,000, not bad. And the Model 3 is $40,000. But if you want the long range, it's $50,000. So who else is playing in this electric space besides Tesla? I don't want to talk too much about Tesla, but I want to go back to that later. We have Chevy has two models coming out, the EV and the EUV. These are already marketed vehicles that came out in 2017 without much fanfare. We have the GMC Hummer. We have the Ford Mustang Mach-E, Focus, the Lightning, which is a full-size Ford F-150. And I've listed some other models there. We don't need to really talk that much about that. So going back to Tesla, you know, this is somewhat of our leader in the industry. This is who everyone looks at. This is the halo brand to the electric vehicle market, right? These are the guys setting the standard. In 2017, they only produced 50,000 vehicles. That's less than 0.5% of the entire new vehicle sales that year, or my math might be off on that. That might be another statistic. They do have 3 factories. They have 3 gigafactories. Oh my God, the chat's blowing up. Okay, I'll try and go back to that later. I don't want to get sidetracked because I will. So anyway, Tesla production numbers. So these are our EV sales in the industry. In 2014, there were some early electric vehicles that we saw come to market. Not too many. We had about 60,000. Here we had 63,000, 72,000, 17, 18, 19 is the latest data that this graph had. Tesla accounted for 80% of those sales, and most of those were in the state of California. About half of Tesla's sales took place in California in 2018 and in 2019 and 2020. Now we're looking at this as a percent of the market. So electric vehicles currently make up 1.7% of the market. That's not significant. And I really, this graph is quite ambitious. You're going to notice there's some of these black graphics in here. Can't tell you where these came from, but let's just say they're proprietary information. So we have several factors driving this adoption of electric vehicles. We often think of electric vehicles as technology filled. So as the battery prices fall, we're going to see the prices coincide with that. The ranges are getting better. The body styles are getting better, and public charging infrastructure is getting better, which is helping drive that sales curve up. We also have products that are changing. Electric vehicles tend to look more futuristic. The design styling, they can do a lot with the front end because there's no radiator. They don't have to worry about cooling, things like that. And the expectations, the delivery, the sales experience, and the retail experience. You know, have you ever been to a mall where there was a Tesla store in it? I have. It's pretty weird. Now, I know I'm kind of all over the place. I want to breeze through this because I want to get to question and answer. I think that's the most important part. Combined charging systems. So there are currently 2 plugs out there that everyone's using, okay? Tesla has its own plug. They're on their own page. They have more plugs, but they have less stations. Let's take a look at this number on the right here. 900 locations with 8,600 plugs. Well, that's not really advantageous. They're future-proofing against more Tesla vehicles, but right now we need more charging stations. You'll see here there's 2,600 charging stations with the US universal plug, the J117, which basically everyone uses except for Mitsubishi. Nissan is moving to the universal plug, and that is going to be the standard for any vehicles sold in the United States. We do have 3 levels of charging. I know this has been spoken on twice now. So, but we have level 1. That's where you're going to plug in just a 110 outlet, like you'd plug your microwave into. Level 2 is what you'd plug your dryer or your stove into. That's a 240 volt. And that's what we suspect most people will have at home. The cost for a charger is between $500 and $1,000 for the actual charging unit. I've got a picture of one later. They do need to be professionally installed. I know that the previous gentleman mentioned it, some of them don't. They pretty much all do. And the reason is there's a lot of liability there for your homeowner's insurance, things like that. So you really want an electrician to install the plug properly. And then DC fast chargers. These are anywhere from $50,000 to $60,000. I think the most least expensive one is $35,000, $40,000 that I've found for a DC fast charger. Requires a significant investment on the electrical side too, where the hookup is for the power company. So I'm going to slow down here for a second. Who's buying these vehicles? Well, we have kind of different fits for everyone. The average US driver drives about 40 to 50 miles a day. In Aroostook County, we tend to drive more than everyone else, right? And the rest of the state. I guarantee a lot of people here have a pretty good sized commute to work. I personally, it's 7 miles to the dealership, 7 miles back, and I do that at least 3 to 4 times a day. The person that's going to buy this has access to a charger at home and hopefully a charger at work. You know, where it's somewhat suitable is someone who drives still less than that 200-mile range, doesn't have a charger at home, but they might have one at work or vice versa. Our charger is at the dealership for my electric vehicle. And then challenging is if they drive over 200 miles, it's probably not going to work. Now we're getting into more commercial purposes, and I'm not touching on anything commercial tonight. Okay. Check my time. 15. Okay. There's a lot of customer objections. Electric vehicles are seen as this unicorn. You know, we talk about them like everyone understands them, but more often than not, being on the industry side, I mentioned electric vehicle. Well, how do they work? How do they drive? How do you turn them on? It's just a normal car. The only difference is the propulsion system. If I sat you in an electric vehicle and said, turn it on and go, you would never know the difference. You might think it's a little quieter, but there's absolutely no difference. And that's the point. The market is trying to drive home, and Tesla's done a really good job of this, of managing the customer's expectations. They make it as easy to use as possible. My Bolt EV runs just like a regular car. Push to start, you've got your climate touchscreen, you've got a shifter, and you go. That's it. The propulsion's just different. So we have to overcome a lot of these objectives. How's the cold weather going to affect it? Well, yeah, the cold's going to cause some battery degradations. It's actually pretty significant. The Bolt has an estimated range of 260 miles. I delivered it on a very cold January day, and I was getting about 170, and that was ambitious. But still, that's within my usable envelope of electric vehicles, and that's only going to get better with range. Range anxiety. Am I going to run out of power? Probably not, but it's still there in the back of your head. Model options. There's not a lot of options right now. There's very few electric vehicles. Most of these hardened manufacturers have very small offerings for electric vehicles as far as choices. I know the Bolt comes in 2 trim levels. That's it. Maintenance. What do I have to do to make my vehicle run? I know my engine, I have to put oil in it. I have to get it changed. You know, you have to do regular maintenance. Electric vehicles, it's a little different. So there's a learning curve there. In most cases, it's less maintenance. Do they drive the same? Of course. It's a regular vehicle. And safety, which is a big concern with these batteries. So we have to overcome these customer objections first. So direct sales is one of the other huge problems facing our industry. All of these new electric vehicle entrants, including Tesla, Rivian, Lordstown, and consult my notes here. That page is blank. They all have direct sales models. So what does that mean? Well, direct sales are illegal in Maine. You can't do it. There are prohibitions in pretty much every state. 38 states restrict direct sales, meaning much like an iPhone, you'd order it directly from the company, they'd get it to you. Right now, we use the dealership model, the franchise model. It's been tried and true for 100 years, and now electric vehicles are coming in and trying to disrupt this. This seems to be the way they want to go. So, yeah, there's also a restriction on manufacturers owning dealerships. So the manufacturer can't even have a dealership. Maryland, Nevada, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, California, Florida, Illinois, Massachusetts, and Ohio do permit direct sales in some way. There are also bills in 11 other states for direct sales. Now, obviously, this is receiving huge pushback from the National Auto Dealers Association and franchise dealers alike, because there's a number of reasons why the dealership model is the best model. Okay. We've reached, economics and consumerism normally plays out to the most advantageous model or the best system, right? The best system always wins. So if your vehicle, and again, I don't mean to pick on Tesla. I think Cam's still in here. Cam has one and he's going to hit me with some questions. If your Tesla breaks down today in Presque Isle, Maine, who's going to fix it? Well, they're going to send a truck from Boston to come get it. And now you're without a vehicle for 2 weeks. Is that the most efficient model? Probably not. So that's also hindering that electric vehicle adoption. Now, until these major manufacturers like Ford, General Motors, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Mercedes, Volvo, come up with more available and desirable electric vehicles, we're going to see some of that pushback. So there's a lot of problems with the direct sales model. So let's go again on. There's a lot of other issues, the EPA standards that the manufacturers are facing. And I know I'm going to run long, so I'm going to probably end with this. But the second biggest issue facing the automotive industry today is the federal EPA standards. This was an Obama era change through the EPA. And basically it demanded that the manufacturers reach certain miles per gallon goals by certain timeframes. Now, what has this caused? Well, if you came to me and said, Chris, I want to order a pickup with a 5.3 gas engine today, I'd say, yeah, okay, it's going to be 6 months, because they're restricting the gas engines to meet these standards. Tesla only makes money the last 3 years. The only reason that company is profitable is because they sell their electric vehicle credits to the major manufacturers so they can meet these EPA standards. That's a big problem. And where it becomes a big problem on the consumer side is that Ford started doing this to the dealers. Luckily, we haven't had it happen to us. But the manufacturer can count a sale of the vehicle when it hits the dealer's lot, when the dealer gets invoiced for it. So what did Ford do? Built a bunch of electric vehicles, said, here you go. You get them whether you like them or not, and we don't care if you sell them or not, because we just counted that as a sale. That's a big problem. That's going to trickle down to the consumer. And ultimately, that is going to hurt consumers. It's one of my beliefs that these standards have really forced the market to move forward a lot faster than it should. The customers want the product. So let's wait until the manufacturers can develop the product, meet those customer needs, and get there in a timely manner, but also not so fast that mistakes are made. And we are already seeing some mistakes being made in the electric vehicle industry, and it's ultimately going to hurt the consumers. So that's where I want to stop. I do have a picture. This is my electric vehicle, and this is the charger I've installed. It's pretty easy, and I have seen the chat blow up. I invite anyone to chime in here. If I can figure out how to stop sharing, there we go. All right. Can you guys see my screen anymore? I don't think so. I can see it. There we go. Okay. So do I have any questions? I know the chat. Here we go.
Yeah. Chris, they had a question about the, I guess, mile efficiency in cold weather. Looked like the chat, they said about 20 to 25% of loss in the EV range in cold weather. That's similar to what you experienced, correct?
That's about on par. Yeah. The Bolt, which is the one I showed you there at the end, that's the General Motors vehicle. It has a published at 255. I was getting, what I have noticed, and what is a great plus, is that the computer's really accurate at predicting it. So once it figures out the climate and your driving habits, it is very accurate. If it says 150 miles or 180, you're going to hit 180 miles. It took a couple days to get there. So if you're moving from climates, it's going to be an issue.
Chris,
All right,
I had a
any other
question.
questions?
Yep, I had a quick question, Chris. What kind of interest are you getting from potential buyers here in the county? I mean, are you seeing a lot more, a lot less?
So as far as I know, and I can only speak to General Motors, that's my wheelhouse I'm representing here. The nearest electric vehicle General Motors dealer is Waterville. Bangor is not one. I don't believe Pape is either in Portland. Quirk of Portland is, that's where I got the car from. We are not an electric vehicle dealer. And to be honest, the training and the tooling required to get there, it's just, given the customer interest, it's not there yet. We're exploring it. I really bought this vehicle as a proof of concept. I wanted to be able to say to my customers, okay, this is some of the technology you should expect. I want people to drive it. It's a service loaner, and I get service customers all the time. You want to wait for your oil change, or you want to take the EV? And they're scared. They don't want to drive it. Like it's going to harm them or something. And that's the biggest struggle right now in Aroostook County. People don't know what electric vehicles are. They don't know how they work. They don't know how they drive. And they drive like a normal vehicle, but overcoming those anxieties is going to be our biggest challenge, I think.
Thank you.
Yes. Other questions? Okay, thank you. I know I crammed a lot in there. If anyone has any questions, just shoot me a private message. So.
Thank you, Chris. We appreciate the great introduction to the EV industry and what the outlook looks like moving forward. I saw in our chat box, there's a good segue here. There was a good question about, is there electric snowmobiles? That's very popular up here in northern Maine, especially in Aroostook County. It's a huge economic driver for the region. And I think it's a good segue to introduce our next panelist, who is across the border. We have Michael Pezzaferri. He is the Public and Government Affairs Attaché with the Quebec Government Office in Boston. So in Michael's role, he is responsible for government relations between Quebec and New England, as well as the office's work in climate, transportation, and energy policy. Michael works closely on transportation electrification collaboration in the region and assists companies interested in forging partnerships on both sides of the border. Mr. Pezzaferri will be speaking about Quebec's adoption of EVs and charging infrastructure. He will also be presenting the economic relationship between Quebec and Maine and ways that the Quebec government can work with Aroostook County on developing a regional EV industry. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Galen, and thank you, Jay, as well, for the invitation. It's really nice to be with you all, even though it is virtually. I'm sure I'm speaking to a crowd that can understand my pain of being stuck within the borders of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for the past 14 months. I have not been able to travel north at all. But it's really nice to be with you all tonight, and thank you to everybody who's presented so far. The folks from Efficiency Maine are one of the partners that we work very closely with, so I was glad to see their presentation, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Senator Stewart as well, and from Judy from Versant. So I'm not gonna take the full time that was allotted to me. I just wanted to give a quick overview sort of Quebec's story with electric vehicles to give a sense of where we're at, why we've taken the route that we have. And maybe it's a little bit of a look into where the region is headed as well. So I thought it might be helpful to start. I think probably most of you folks are pretty familiar with Quebec, but it's always helpful to just sort of position where everything is. So we are the largest province in Canada. which is 2.5 times the size of Texas, which I always find quite amazing. And our population is 8.5 million people, which is similar to New York City, or about 6 times the size of Maine. But more importantly, I would say, is that 90% of that population lives within 100 miles of the US border. And we do border 4 US states and 2 provinces. So we border more states than we do other Canadian provinces, which is the reverse of Maine, which of course borders just 1 state and 2 Canadian provinces. And importantly for that, we share the same waters, we share the same air. And what we've been fortunate about in the Northeast is that we also share a commitment to the environment. And part of that is transitioning eventually to electric vehicles. So on this front, Quebec has been addressing decarbonization on a few different fronts, largely because as a northern province, much like Maine, we started feeling the impact of climate change many years ago. Some of you on the call may remember the Saguenay flood in 1996, which the images are certainly seared in my memory. Our most recent initiative on the climate change front is our 2030 plan for a green economy, which is very well aligned with Maine Won't Wait, which is Maine's newest climate change plan. And it's aligned both on the principles and on the objectives, primarily I'd say because we're facing very similar challenges in Quebec and Maine. Chief among them, that most of our carbon emissions come from the transportation sector. In Quebec, we're at 42%, and I think the last time I checked, Maine was at 54% of its emissions coming from the transportation sector. And so in order to meet our common carbon reduction goals and our climate change goals, we're going to have to tackle that sector. So this plan in Quebec dictates that by 2030, all vehicles in Quebec sold will be emission-free, and it actually bans the sale of gasoline-powered vehicles by 2035, which is joined in North America only by California, Massachusetts, and just recently, New Jersey. We're also committed to making 100% of the Quebec government fleet electric by 2030. And all of this is not without efforts to grow the economy as well. So this plan calls for 15,000 new jobs to be created in the clean tech sector. And in total, Quebec will have 1.5 million EVs on the road by 2030. The main plan aims for 219,000 EVs on the road by that same time, which percentage-wise is actually similar in terms of the total fleet, as you heard from Molly a little bit earlier. And it's obvious, I think we've all heard a little bit about the challenges here. These are really ambitious goals, but we do now have the data to know that climate action can work and that it can actually be, for us at least, it's been a tool for economic development. In 2006, Quebec put in place a series of climate action mechanisms, including something we call the Electrification and Climate Change Fund, that have yielded very important economic benefits and really did give us the means to walk the talk on climate action. So from 1990, which is usually the baseline from where you compare your carbon emissions, so from 1990 to 2017, Quebec's emissions did go down by almost 9%. During that same period, our population grew by 18% and the GDP grew by 66%. So it certainly hasn't been, this ambitious climate action has certainly not been an impediment on the economy. And since then, with some of these measures, we've invested almost 3 billion Canadian dollars, so probably about 2.3 US dollars, has been invested in initiatives to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change. And because transportation is the largest source of our emissions, 2/3 of that money was invested in incentives to adopt electric vehicles and adopt electrification of public transportation and promote public transportation. Particularly, I will note, in rural regions of the province. So only about 50% of Quebec's population lives in cities in either Montreal or the Quebec City metropolitan regions, which leaves about 4.5 million people that live in what we would define as a rural area. And these places have not been left out of the transition to electrification and electric vehicles in Quebec. Actually, one of the largest dealerships, and Chris, your presentation made me think of this, one of the largest dealerships that sells electric vehicles in all of Canada is actually located in a small town called Roude in Quebec, which is almost 2 hours outside of Montreal. So we have seen this growth in smaller communities as well. And this was discussed in the chat a bit, but we've also seen growth of completely new industries as a result of our push for electric vehicles. So 45,000 jobs in that same period that I was talking about since 2006 have been created in the clean tech sector, which prior to these investments wasn't a huge growth area in the province. And one great example, which I think some folks in the chat were talking about too, is Taiga Motors, which is an electric snowmobile company. They also do jet skis, which was a few guys from McGill University created this company a few years ago now, and they just went public and raised $100 million in funding. There's still a wait list. I think a few people were talking about trying to get their hands on one of them. There is still a wait list. They're not in production yet, but we're really looking forward to seeing those on the trails in Maine and on the trails in Quebec and New Brunswick very soon. And to give you a scope of the market, I don't have the latest figures, but it's roughly 6 million vehicles on the road in Quebec. But right now there's about 120,000 EVs. So you can do sort of the quick math. It's not happening as fast as any of us would like, but it is happening at a very rapid clip. And it's happening faster in Quebec than it is in the rest of Canada by far. So we make up about a quarter of the Canadian population, but we have 50% of the EVs currently on the road in the country. And we don't expect that that number is going down. And as we await longingly the border to reopen between the US and Canada, the state of Maine and the province of Quebec have been having regular conversations through my office and through folks at the legislature as well, folks in the governor's office regarding tourism and how we can promote our border communities in particular, and especially those businesses that have suffered most during the pandemic, because we don't want people to drive to Montreal or Boston and get on a plane. We'd love them to stay in this region, spend their money in this region as soon as the border reopens. And when we look forward to the growth of the EV industry and putting that in the context of economic development for this region, we really believe in Quebec, and we've seen this firsthand, that investing in EV infrastructure will become crucial. It already has in Quebec, and I think it will become crucial in this region as well to our tourism economy. And just a number on that, 1.2 million people from Quebec visit New England by car every year. 400,000 of those folks are going to Maine, and they're spending close to $200 million every year when they're traveling. And in the reverse, 100,000 Mainers are traveling to Quebec every year. So these are pretty significant numbers. And if we really are serious, which the Quebec government certainly is, about transitioning to a 100% electric fleet by 2035, having EV chargers will make a difference for where Quebec tourists will decide to go, where we hope they will spend a lot of their time. And if Molly's still on the line, and I'm happy to talk about this as well, in the question period, we had a great event about a month and a half ago with the folks at Efficiency Maine. Folks from Hannaford were on the line, as well as folks from Circle K, which is Irving. And they've made that a major part of their strategy actually for business attraction, is building EV chargers at their locations across Canada. And they're hoping to do that as well across Maine. So that may be part of the strategy for the state moving forward. And, something just sort of to end on is that I don't think this transition is going to change our lifestyles in any way. I think it will make our lifestyles more sustainable and perhaps even a little bit more fun. For those of you who have driven an EV, it can be quite the thrill to see the acceleration that it has. And I can only imagine what an electric snowmobile or jet ski will be like when those are finally on the trails. And one thing that I can say too, with a lot of confidence, is that a number of these products, including electric buses and electric garbage trucks and utility trucks, we don't make cars in Quebec, but we do make those other things, including the snowmobiles. They've been tested on the roads in Quebec, so we certainly can have you covered even in the harshest of conditions. And we make that a priority. We've heard from a number of transit agencies across New England that would love to have electric buses on the road, but they contract with a company in California, and the bus works great on a 70-degree California day, which happens about twice a year, depending on where you are in New England. And then the doors start not opening and you run into these other problems. So we've made that a major part of our industry. Somebody mentioned Flow earlier, which is one of many EV chargers in the province based in Quebec. And that's joined by a number of other companies that are active in this region and creating jobs in this region. And the final one that I'll end on is a really interesting collaboration we have going right now just across the border in New Hampshire with White Mountain Community College. They've started looking at their diesel maintenance program at the community college there, and eventually transitioning it to maintenance and construction of electric vehicles. So we're fostering through our Office of Partnership right now with WMCC and a community college equivalent in Quebec, which is where the Lion Electric Bus Company is located and close by that EV dealership outside of Montreal, to help train students in New Hampshire for how to maintain and build electric vehicles. So there's a lot of this is happening. I think it's an exciting time to be in this conversation. My office is down in Boston, but we're across New England all the time, and especially as we all get vaccinated and can look forward to traveling again. I hope to be up in Maine, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with folks all across the region in northern Maine, and we can always loop in our friends in New Brunswick at some point as that makes sense as well. So happy to answer any questions about Quebec's situation or anything like that. And look forward to meeting some of you in person soon.
Right, any questions for Michael?
I have just one quick endorsement. The Mount Desert Island High School is taking delivery of the first fully electric school bus in Maine. It's an eLion. Thank you.
I'll be excited when that's on the road. There's a few of them in New England. You're right, Gordon, that's going to be the first one in Maine. And I think Portland actually contracted for a couple too. And they're going to be getting eLion makes school buses. They make a small transit vehicle. They also make utility trucks and a garbage truck, which is 100% electric. And that is also contracted down in Portland. It's going to be the first two, I believe, on the roads in anywhere in New England right now. And one note that actually I should mention, sorry, Galen, just to add in a couple of weeks, the New England governors and Eastern Canadian premiers, so all 6 governors from this region and the 5 Eastern Canadian premiers, including the Premier of Quebec, are going to be meeting on May 17th, hosted virtually, of course, by Nova Scotia. But one major part of that conversation over the past few years has been how to link this region through electric vehicle charging networks. So that includes northern Maine. And without the folks at Efficiency Maine Trust, we could never have done this work, but we're trying to fill in the gaps. If you look at the map for these fast chargers in particular, how can we make sure that if you're going to get to Augusta, I think somebody pointed this out, it does become difficult to find a fast charger once you're beyond that point. How do we make sure that where you're going, you can get to all of the parts of our region, all 6 states and all 5 provinces without being concerned about range anxiety? So we are continuing that conversation. The meeting in a couple of weeks is going to be focused primarily around COVID, but in the interim, and I saw somebody's from DEP is on the line, we continue these conversations all the time between our government agencies and the folks in Maine to ensure those interoperability questions and also the infrastructure itself, that it gets built.
Thank you, Michael. Any other questions? If not, our symposium has covered a lot, especially you've been introduced with what is an EV. You've learned a little bit about the chargers. You learned a little bit about the plans for the industry as well as our neighbors in Quebec. But most importantly, I think it's crucial that we learn a little bit about what our local energy supplier is planning for the future to supply all this power necessary to charge these EVs. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce our next panelist, it's Judy Long. She is the Director of Communications and Brand for Versant Power. Since joining the company more than 4 years ago, Judy has worked to begin integrating fully electric vehicles into Versant Power's fleet, support the development of EV technology in Maine, and educate consumers about the benefits of EVs. She will be discussing Versant's plans to prepare for the adoption of EV technology by the public and the EV fleet conversion underway. So with that being said, thank you and welcome, Judy.
Thanks a lot, Galen. I'm really pleased to be here today. Thanks everybody for taking the time to tune in and everybody that joined the panel. I would like to share that shortly after joining Versant Power about 4.5 years ago now, one of the first events I actually participated in and my first experience driving a plug-in hybrid was to go visit Gordon on Mount Desert Island at an electric vehicle symposium that was being held at one of the local auto museums, where I started learning about the history of electric vehicles and talking to people, learning what they were driving. A short couple of months later, I was in Presque Isle proper at the Northern Maine Fair, where Versant Power sponsors the Little Farmers at the Fair, which is a free thing for children that come to the fair. I don't know if you've all seen it. But one of the things that I did is I brought up our plug-in hybrid. We had a Chevy Bolt at the time. And I was there handing out plastic hard hats to the kiddos and speaking with their parents, aunts and uncles, grandparents about electric vehicles. And to echo some of the things that I've heard here today, as I travel around northern and eastern Maine, first in that plug-in hybrid and now as of January of 2019, when we got our first Chevy Bolt in our first fully electric battery powered vehicle, I get a lot of questions. A lot of people haven't had the experience of driving an electric vehicle. A lot of people have heard negative things, but not necessarily many of the positive things. So it's been a great experience out in the community. I can't wait to be able to get back out in the community to keep talking to people and getting that opportunity. I do meet those people that are skeptical about that technology, just despite the fact they haven't had the personal experience. I would echo the experts from Efficiency Maine saying that it's a quiet ride. It has great acceleration. It's a smooth ride. And when I'm talking about vehicles with my family and friends, I've got some automobile enthusiasts in that group. And when the topics of EVs comes up, you know, what else do you talk about? Is the acceleration good? Is it a quiet, smooth ride? What's the mileage like? And those are all things that I've had really good experiences with EVs. I do get the question, well, don't you get the reduced range because of the cold weather in Maine? And yes, my experience has been about the same, about that 20-25% loss of range in very, very cold weather. But I will tell you that one of the first things I did was take it down to Augusta, which is an 80-mile plus trip from where I was outside of Bangor, brought it back, bitter cold day, no problems. So it is possible, and it's getting better and better. Went from that first Chevy Bolt, which at that time they were saying it was about 228 miles that you can get on a full charge. I definitely got more than that in the summer. And then the newest one, we've just got another second Bolt this year. As my other presenters have mentioned here today, got it to about 259. We're bringing that newer vehicle up to Presque Isle. And that's going to be one of the ones that we use for our employees that are doing travel on business. So we will have one right there at our Presque Isle Ops Center. And I'm very excited to sort of take it around to some of these events. So that's been my experience here. I also was sort of my predecessors here at Versant Power were big advocates interested in involving technologies related to beneficial electrification, i.e. heat pumps and EVs. As you may remember, we did a pilot program back in 2013 when the acceptance of cold climate heat pumps was not really yet much of a thing here. And we saw that some of our best results were in Aroostook County with customers who tried our heat pumps for the first time. And one of the things that I'm excited about is that I think the opportunity, like others have said, for rural businesses and individuals to save money and cut their greenhouse gas emissions, I think those opportunities are actually best in some of the rural areas because you are absolutely some of the people that are doing the most driving. But with the extended range of the vehicles and the money saving opportunities, I think that there's some really good choices that are being put out there. So I'm going to try to share my screen as well. I've got a quick couple slides just to talk a little bit more about Versant Power and to talk to you a little bit about how we're looking at electrifying our fleet, as well as some support we've given to programs that are looking to sort of expand education and acceptance of electric vehicles. All right. So I think everybody can see that. Am I correct? Okay, I'm getting nods. That's good.
Yep.
All right. So to tell you a little bit about Versant Power, for those of you that may not be from the area, Versant Power is an electricity transmission and distribution utility. We serve more than 160,000 customers in northern and eastern Maine, and we've got a little map there that shows our territory. We have more than 400 employees throughout northern and eastern Maine providing those services. Our unceasing commitment, of course, is to the safety and reliability of the electricity grid. We have a strong focus on continual improvement. And we also want to be a trusted partner in helping Maine meet its climate goals while making affordability an important priority. As you heard today, electric vehicles have many benefits to both the user and the environment. And that's where Versant Power sees a lot of opportunity. We've helped sponsor EV charging stations for some organizations that have approached us who are interested in putting up some charging stations and thought we might like an opportunity to help them out. We had a charging station at the Trenton Visitors Center right off Mount Desert Island for a period of time that we had sponsored. We also sponsor an EV charging station at the Cross Insurance Center in Becknport. So we've put up some money to those organizations to help make sure that there's some more charging infrastructure out there and to sort of get people on board. A lot of times I'll follow up with questions about, well, have you noticed a change in your electricity use? And as some other people have mentioned here, these level 2 charging stations are like having an appliance. So if you have a facility in which you use a fair amount of electricity, maybe more than the average home, it might not be much of a noticeable change in what you're using for electricity. Now, certainly as adoption of electric vehicles increases, or you're looking at level 3 charging infrastructure, that is likely to change. But at this time, a lot of people have not seen a big problem in terms of what's going to happen to my electric bill. And I can tell you that we understand that there's probably a lot of opportunity. Efficiency Maine mentioned that they're going to be looking at some pilot programs around making sure consumers perhaps charge overnight when electricity usage is lower so that we don't increase the peak demand of electricity. But I think there are going to be some interesting opportunities with rate design and with education to make sure that you can add a lot of electric vehicles to the grid without having to have a big increase in costs to upgrade infrastructure. Although as we continually move toward beneficial electrification, there will be some occasions to build out the grid. At Versant Power, we also donated an electric vehicle to Northern Maine Community College's automotive technology program, specifically for them to start learning how they would work on those vehicles. And so we're still kind of getting into it, but those are some things that we've done in terms of supporting electric vehicles in other places. So next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing. So I've been, as I mentioned, driving an electric vehicle here at Person Power. I was an instigator in terms of pressing really hard for us to get our first Chevy Bolt fully electric vehicle, and now we have a second. What we're doing is we're starting to talk to experts in the field. We're starting to talk with other utilities over the last couple of years to start talking about how we can integrate EV technology. And what we want to do is we want to develop an intelligent plan. We want to identify an achievable way for us to transition to an electric fleet without endangering our ability to make it to every place in our service territory that might need service in the middle of the night, on a weekend, whenever it is. Because as you might imagine, serving a large rural service territory like we do, those are things that not only are concerns from customers, but concerns we want to make sure we have soundly answered for ourselves. We've actually been talking to an organization recently that uses very sophisticated data that we gather about how many vehicle miles we get and how often. And what they do is they use that to crunch some numbers and to determine what kind of EV might be an equitable substitute for that vehicle, how often you might have to charge it in the middle of the day, because that's obviously not the ideal situation. You want to take your vehicle home, charge it overnight like most users do. But they also look at the weather factor. Will there be days? When will there be days? How many days will there be where you might lose some of your range because of cold weather? And they can give you some suggestions on how you can trade to a plug-in hybrid or a fully electric vehicle, make an astounding reduction in your greenhouse gas use, cut your, the money that you spend on gas, cut maintenance costs, and what that looks like and how you can quantify it. So there is some information out there like this that's pretty interesting. And we're, as part of our commitment to keep looking at these evolving technologies and supporting this, we're just continuing our commitment. We're trying to follow along with Maine's climate goals by phasing our vehicles in as we just naturally phase out fleet vehicles. And then we hope that we're going to be able to map out some charging infrastructure needs, look at what's out there in the public infrastructure, look at our own facilities, see if there might be places where we can support public charging or at our own facilities to make sure that we do this in a way while also planning for the future. Our parent company, NMAX, actually is working on a pilot project right now with a medium duty vehicle. The medium and heavy duty vehicle market right now is not as mature. So with some of our really big bucket trucks, boom trucks, things like that, we're going to look for some pilot opportunities to see if we can give them a test, see how they run and how that works for us. So still developing that plan, but we've set some goals for how many EVs we want to phase in. We want to manage the change for our employees and make sure to bring them along and do it in a way that is saving us money and looking toward the future. All right. Let's see. Let me see. All right, can you still see my last slide here?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm gonna, I know because I can touch it. There we go. All right. So why does driving electric matter? And we get this question sometimes. So I've got some information here about the makeup of Maine's electricity generation. As you can see, choosing an electric vehicle in Maine means you're automatically reducing your carbon footprint and you're moving your energy toward more renewable sources. As more and more people support moving to renewable energy and we increase the amount of renewable energy that's on the grid, we expect this mix to become clearer over time. But right now, as it stands, 80% of the electricity generated in Maine does come from renewable sources. We have a lot of hydro, we have some wind, we do have some biomass still. We've got a lot of customers that are choosing self-supply and a lot of community solar projects that are going up. The cost of solar panels has fallen 90% over the last 10 years. There are new incentives available to make it more attractive. There's also more and more energy storage possibilities. One of the things that we're looking to do here at Person Power is a pilot program with some storage, which would support reliability of the grid and also potentially allow us to store some of the energy that is produced at times when perhaps people aren't using as much that is being generated. And one of the areas that we think that could have some really good impact is in northern Maine. So that's something we're evaluating right now. And as you heard from a couple of other sources, transitioning transportation and home heating to renewable power energy are going to be really key to achieving the Maine's climate goals, because that's where the bulk of that those greenhouse gas emissions come from. Not so much from electricity generation, as you just saw, because that is 80% renewable, although we do have room for improvement on that. But we do have quite a bit of opportunity in transportation in these sectors. So one of the things I'm also thinking about today is a conversation I had not very long ago, pre-pandemic, which seems like a long time ago, but really wasn't that long ago. I was at the Caribou Parks and Rec Center, and we had a great conversation with a group of retirees there who wanted to have some more information about electricity, the markets in general. And one of the conversations turned to electric vehicles. And there was a woman there, and she just looked at me and said, you know, I want to make sure that we don't let northern Maine get left behind when it comes to making the transition to EV charging infrastructure, when it comes to making these transitions toward making the world a better place. Don't let northern Maine get left behind. And that's something that really resonated with me. It's one of the reasons that I'm so excited that coming up, we're going to have more opportunities, hopefully, to talk about these things and to sort of start building out the infrastructure up there. So really excited, very grateful to the community organizing this event today, and eager to learn more and see more things to be excited about. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Judy. Any questions for the panelists? I'll say, Judy, that was one thing you brought up was about the renewable sources of energy that make up 80% of the makeup of Versant's power. That was something that I noticed too when we were writing this and promoting this EV symposium for Northern Maine, that a lot of areas in the country don't have that luxury. They still rely on coal powered plants for their generation. So when you plug in your EV, you think you're doing a lot for the environment, reducing carbon emissions, but you're really not. Versus up here in Northern Maine, we really have that advantage. Wouldn't you say so? Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, and because I've heard people make that point, they say, well, you're just swapping one dirty fuel for another, because there are a lot of states, and frankly, there are states where electricity is very cheap because they use a lot of coal, which is very cheap. And we are not in a situation like that. We're lucky to have some good hydroelectric resources. We're lucky that the price of solar is coming down, and that's only going to expand. We have some wonderful wind resources in Northern Maine. We do have the biomass that does still exist in Maine. So we are very lucky. We do have a lot of renewable resources. So when you plug in Maine, the electricity you're getting is 80% of the time going to be coming from a renewable resource. So that's something to really hang your hat on in terms of you can immediately make a difference in your carbon footprint if that's something that you really feel strongly about. And you can do it while you're still saving money. So it's a win.
Judy, do you know, as a follow-up, so if Aroostook County and Northern Maine, you know, with Bangor and North, if the transition starts to occur with a lot of more EV technology, what is Versant's plan to address congestion-related challenges?
So what's difficult here at Versant Power is that, and I get this too when people want to put in charging infrastructure, it's really easy for us to say, well, you're putting in another 240 volt plug or whatever it is. Like we look at it like we would look at any welding shop or any grocery store or whatever it is. You know, we can help you understand what your usage may be. But what we don't understand is perhaps how many people are actually going to go plug in at your charging station. It's hard for us to predict exactly how many people are going to adopt the electric vehicles, not only here, but in areas that have tourists that come to me. That's a really hard thing for us to predict. So there's a little bit of unpredictability there, but I will speak generally about the grid in Northern Maine. We used to have a lot more very large mills that operated in Northern Maine, more manufacturers that operated in Northern Maine. So the grid was built for a level of electricity usage well above and beyond what is being used right now. So there is some headroom, generally speaking, on the grid. Are there areas where there is congestion, transmitting electricity from one area to the other? Absolutely. And will that continue to be an issue if we keep moving toward beneficial electrification? Yes, it will. But what we will have the opportunity to do is to build better infrastructure, more resilient infrastructure as things naturally age out. And there may be some opportunities to make smarter connections there to ensure that the grid is even more reliable than it used to be. And we're also using, like I said, more renewable energy here in the state to support ourselves. So we think there's some good opportunity out there, but in the short term, there is a bit of headroom that we have to work with for more heat pumps, more electric vehicles, and other things associated with beneficial electrification. And I would just add one more thing if I could, and I know that we had some grocers here, and I took the electric vehicle down to Brunswick, Topsom area a couple years ago. And one of the things I did do is there was a level 3 charging station in a grocery store in the area. So I wanted to make it home, and I also wanted to get some lunch. And so I made a point to stop in the place where I knew there was a level 3 charger. I got my lunch. I went into that grocery store and picked up a few things I needed. And I made my choice of where to stop and purchase things directly because there was charging infrastructure there. And I had, because of the 45 minutes I spent grabbing some lunch and a few things at the store, I gained 100 miles of charge and made it back and still had enough charge to go and do other trips. So I think that not only is the example of the Machias Chamber and the visitors stopping by and getting to know the town a good one, but just even if you're in Maine and you have an EV, if you look for those places and you make stops based on that. So I hope that's an incentive as well.
All right, any other questions? Yes, Gordon.
Judy, could you just elaborate a little bit on some of the education initiatives? Is this for high school, elementary, colleges, public? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so at Risen Power, we do a number of what I would call sponsored events. I will speak that we went to the Climate to Thrive Symposium for 2 years running to talk about heat pumps and also to educate customers about how they could manage their electricity usage because of some of the tools that we're actually going to be rolling out to our customers in Northern Maine this summer that give you a snapshot of your electricity usage day to day and eventually even more granularly. We have been to some expos, the sort of like home expos and done events there. Gone to a couple of different EV specific related events to talk about the technology. I will admit that I love to come talk about our business anytime, any place. So I've been to various Rotary clubs. I mentioned the Caribou Rec in that group. But anytime I get an opportunity for a group that's interested in learning more about electricity, AARP, Rotary clubs, any of those community groups, we're always delighted to come by and to talk a little bit more about them. And at some of those events that we can sponsor, such as the Northern Maine Fair, the Crown of Maine Balloon Festival, Maine Potato Blossom Festival, certainly when the pandemic subsides, we want to be there with the electric vehicle. We have been there in the past with the electric vehicle, talking about that and just answering some questions. So if you're having an EV event in Northern and Eastern Maine, we would love to be there when the pandemic is over. And even if it's an event maybe not specifically about EVs, we probably would still love to be there.
All right. Any other questions for Judy? All right. Seeing none, we'll go to our final panelist for tonight. We have Senator Harold Trey Stewart III. He is a state senator here in Presque Isle. He is currently serving in his third term in the Maine legislature after representing the people in the House District 147. Which encompasses most of Presque Isle for the past 4 years. He has previously served as the Assistant House Republican Leader for the 129th Legislature, and he is currently the youngest member of the Maine Senate. Senator Stewart is no stranger to a lot of the folks in the room. He graduated from Presque Isle High School in 2012, undergraduate degree from the University of Maine. He's also, right now, he is the ranking member of the I remember the name, Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee. And he's also involved in the Health Coverage, Insurance, and Financial Services Committee. So Trey's going to give us an update from what's happening in Augusta to conclude today's event. So with that being said, welcome, Trey.
Thank you very much, Galen. Appreciate all the work that went in with you and Cam and the folks at MDC and the City of Presque Isle to organize tonight's talk. In looking at the time, I recognize that folks are probably getting a little tired after 2+ hours on a Zoom. So I'm going to try to keep my remarks as brief as possible, but it's good to see you all and continue this dialogue certainly into the future as well. So as Galen mentioned, I do serve as the ranking member on the Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee. That's a role that really hasn't been particularly well represented by anybody in the legislature from Aroostook County in the last decade or so. And so I think now is a pretty good time to have some of these tougher conversations. And I know that, you know, Judy's been and her whole team really have been incredibly active this session down in the legislature. There's a lot going on right now. And a lot that impacts utilities, a lot more that impacts ratepayers. And so juggling all those concerns is an important role of that committee. This is a fun area, I think, because it covers all three components of the EUT committee: energy, utilities, and technology. It's pretty rare when we actually get to see that. Usually we're dealing with things in sort of a silo or an isolated, you know, vacuum. But I think it's important because as we think about what EVs mean, it impacts all of those things. But at the same time, there's a lot of benefits that I think go maybe unnoticed. And, you know, you just heard from Judy at Versant. And so you all presumably pay a bill every month to the utility. And it's a challenge because one of the problems that we have up here, as Judy astutely noted, is that when we've lost, you know, 3 decades ago, Aroostook County had over 100,000 people living in it. And we had a military base and we had a lot of other, you know, industry going on. And as that's dropped off and as people have left, we've lost over 30% of that. And so our infrastructure was designed to have a lot more load on our area of the grid, which puts a lot of strain on those that are left because there's a lot of fixed costs baked into that the utility necessarily has to be able to recover in order to stay in business. And so what that means is that our bills will go up, particularly as those problems promulgate if nothing else changes. So one of the things that we're working on in the EUT committee is finding creative ways to change that dynamic. And one of the best ways that we can do that is by increasing our usage, really. So that involves things like heat pumps. Not saying that we should replace, you know, your base load sort of heat, whether it's hopefully locally sourced pellets or more likely oil or some sort of fossil fuel based heat. But you can supplement that with something like a heat pump. And that is going to increase consumption and do so to help offset your cost for things like heating your home or your business. There's also a number of rebates available for those sort of programs, as you heard earlier from Efficiency Main Trust. Same idea with electric vehicles. So from a policy perspective, it makes a lot of sense to encourage folks, particularly in our neck of the woods, to at least consider electric vehicles. Now, it may not work for all of you, depending on what you do for a living, depending on what your travel needs are, as you heard everybody talk about tonight, and I don't need to rehash any of those arguments. But if it works for you, and then it makes a lot of sense to do that. And that's why you're seeing the government step up and play a little bit more active of a role in making sure that the financing of those products is at a price point that makes sense. That's often what the challenge is, right? Is that a lot of these shifts, when you're getting away from things like, you know, fossil fuel, there's an upfront cost that's rather substantial. So being able to mitigate that financial exposure is important. And that's why you're seeing some of these things like rebates. You know, Chris mentioned earlier some other incentives as well to making those purchases. And so that's going to be a big help. If we can get more folks to understand, particularly as the cost of gas is going up, and we've all seen in the last, 6 months or so that the price of gas has really started to increase. And if that trend continues, it makes more and more sense by the day to start looking at a different option. Now, the challenge is keeping our energy rates low, right? What doesn't work is if gas prices go up, but energy prices go up even more. And if that's the case, then we're going to be losing some of that incentive to have folks make that shift over to an electric vehicle option. So that's a priority from my perspective on the Energy Committee, is how do we keep costs low? Not just so that ratepayers don't feel it in their pocketbook, which is critically important from my perspective, particularly for those on a fixed income. That's what we have a lot of in Aroostook County. We have a lot of folks that are on a fixed income, whether it's Social Security or other forms of retirement. We have to be cognizant of that. That said, if there's a way that they can save money from making a change, we should be encouraging that. The big thing, I think, is from a policy perspective, making sure that we don't unintentionally do something that's going to increase the cost of energy, whether you're in our territory being served by Versant or in Southern Maine being served by CMP or some other consumer-owned utility. If we're trending the wrong way, that's going to be a big problem. But I think that we can do it, and I think that there's a lot of optimism right now to continue on with that trend. That's to say nothing of the environmental benefits, right? So this is really one of those issues, I think, where you get a lot of really interesting bedfellows, right? You've got environmentally concerned folks who are in favor of promoting EVs from the same reason that small businesses are, for the same reason that conservatives and liberals are on the same side of this issue in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of good things that come out of a shift in this sort of policy. And I think that's why you're seeing both Republicans and Democrats recognize that and start to support policies that shift us in that general direction. Other people covered a lot of what I wanted to discuss already tonight. So I do have one more thing I want to go over, and then I'll sort of wrap up and take questions, but I don't want to get repetitive here. One thing that is important to note, I think, is that as we are talking about energy policy from a high level in the state, one thing that is going to be beneficial that is of current debate is the New England Clean Energy Connect. There is a component baked into that project. You heard Efficiency Maine talk about that in this morning, but the specifics on that are that there's $10 million into that settlement agreement that will be going towards charging stations that we can then apply for in the next round of funding, which includes Aroostook County, as well as $5 million for rebates for EVs. So that project, I think, is really important in the next phase of this discussion as we look at what the build out of these charging stations is going to look like, and we continue to push rebates in order to help folks with the upfront cost of EVs. We need to be cognizant that usually these things get funded in rather obscure or interesting ways. So I want to make sure that folks are looking at that issue, the Clean Energy Connect issue, with eyes wide open, because if the referendum passes that essentially kills that project, all of those things go off the table. So if you do support EVs, if you do agree with anything that you heard tonight, please keep that in mind as the referendum comes up next year. And with that, I will end here and answer any questions anybody has. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Senator Stewart. Does anybody have any questions?
Trey, I just want to piggyback off of something you said. We really haven't talked about the green aspect of electric vehicles tonight so much. I think it's a given. But one of the best arguments I hear is, well, the carbon footprint to produce an electric vehicle is the same or greater than a internal combustion vehicle. And to that I say, yeah, sure, it might be, but you have to make a vehicle either way. And that's such a non-argument that I'm sure everyone here overcomes. And it's just something to keep in mind, that it doesn't matter how the vehicle's made. It has to be made one way or the other. It's what happens after the vehicle's made.
Yeah, I think that's right, Chris. And I think that, nobody is suggesting, right, that there isn't an impact to the environment, but there is certainly a lower impact to the environment if you
Oh.
can reduce some of those emissions. And that, I think, in a state like Maine, you heard Judy mention this earlier, right? If we are actually serious about meeting our climate goals, nibbling around the edges with things like solar panels and wind isn't going to cut it, right? You need to have a very concerted effort and a fairly serious push on transportation, because that's where over half of our emissions come from in the state of Maine. I mean, that's really the elephant in the room that I don't think a lot of folks talk about, because there is so much hesitance. I don't know what it is, right? But there's a lot of, folks talked about this earlier tonight. Misconception about what EVs are, right? I've ridden in them, I've driven them. I think they're a lot of fun. I think that they're cool, and they certainly have a lot of muscle, which is something that I think folks maybe don't really understand. They think it's more like a golf cart. That's not really the case, right? Anybody that's driven one can tell you that. If we are serious about any of those climate goals that you heard mentioned, earlier tonight, it's got to involve a lot of EVs and necessarily involve a lot of charging stations.
Just to touch on that point even more, I think from the industry perspective, we're going to see it in the commercial industry a lot sooner. I just did kind of a straw poll one day of UPS, FedEx, and UniFirst. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but just rattling off my head, I believe UniFirst operates 9 delivery trucks. FedEx had close to 25, and UPS was right up there at 25, 26 delivery vehicles. And what's nice about a delivery vehicle is you can fit a lot more battery capacity. So no, I think transportation is the best place to start, and that commercial aspect of it. It's a great perspective, Trey. Thank you.
So Trey, regarding transportation infrastructure, it's sort of related with EVs. As EV technology is widely adopted and readily available, the state of Maine relies heavily on gas tax to maintain our roads and infrastructure. And as more folks transition away from gas to these EV technology, what discussions are taking place, or what conversations do you think are going to be had in your committee that deal with this important issue of funding our roads and bridges moving forward?
Well, thankfully, conversations about transportation funding happen in a different committee, so I don't have to worry about that too much. No, but that's a very good point. We essentially, what we have is a use tax in Maine, where if you drive on the roads, we are essentially assuming that you're purchasing gas, and then a percentage of that sale goes to the state, which is earmarked specifically for roads, bridges, highways, and that sort of thing. And you're absolutely right that as EVs come on the road, or just generally speak, we had this problem before EVs, right? In that as vehicle mileage increased, instead of going 15 miles to the gallon, suddenly vehicles are going 30 without EVs in them. Our intake of revenues goes down. And so it's a problem that I think is going to have to fix one way or the other. It isn't necessarily EVs that are causing this, right? There's frankly not enough EVs on the road to be the impetus to this change yet. We are heading in that direction, and when we do, we will have to figure out what we are going to do as far as a different revenue stream for that sort of thing. We usually end up patchworking it with things like bonds at the state level. That's not really a sustainable model. Thankfully, Susan Collins is in office and is able to provide a very significant amount of funding from the feds to be able to backfill some of those lost revenues and sort of keep our state propped up from an infrastructure point of view. But something's going to have to change eventually. I don't know what that looks like yet. When it does, we want to be cognizant, though, that it goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? That we don't inadvertently penalize folks for making that transition. So we have to get sort of creative in the way that we want to do it. And I don't know what that looks like yet.
Any other questions for Senator Stewart? Well, hearing none, I guess I would like to thank everybody for attending tonight. I think our presenters did an outstanding job. Thank you, Judy, Gordon, Chris, and Senator Stewart. I know a couple of others have already left, and it's unfortunate. As I said at the beginning, I know that when Galen and I really started talking about this, we wanted to make sure to let as many people know what actually is out there when it comes to EVs and charging and those. And I think we've really made a really good first step here tonight to do that. And I don't know where we're going to go. I'm expecting that we will probably have a follow-up to this here in the not too distant future. And we'll go from there. This has been recorded, and I will be getting that out, or at least the notice of that out. So if you know someone that wasn't able to attend tonight, they can contact me and we'll be able to get them a link to that. So with that, I would like to thank again everyone for attending tonight, and I hope that you found this useful. We'll call her good.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you all.
Thank you.